Need some volume on that mic.
All right. That's definitely
There
better.
we go.
All right. Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lynchburg. We are glad you are here. Whoever you are, whatever your beliefs, whatever your gender identity, whatever your age, and whomever you love, you are welcome here. As we work together for justice, compassion, and peace, we also acknowledge with humility that our buildings sit on Monacan land. My name is Courtney Senna, and I've been a member of this congregation for about 20 years, and I am your Director of Lifespan Engagement. If you are with us for the first time on Zoom or in the sanctuary, we are glad you chose to be here this morning to participate in the service for this congregation we love. If you would like to receive our monthly newsletter and Friday email updates, please fill out the virtual visitor card found on our website at uulynchburg.org under Sunday services, or fill out the yellow card found in the back of the chair in front of you and place it in the offering basket when it passes by. Now I invite us to release our worries about the world and our own lives as we enter into the service by taking some slow, calming breaths. All right, let's take a moment to wave good morning to our Zoomies. Good morning, Zoomies. And Zoomies, if you could wave good morning to those of us in the sanctuary. And now we will light our chalice. So please join me in our chalice lighting words. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, O Spirit of life. And our opening words are brought to us today by the Reverend Eve Stevens. So David, you can go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me back. Even though we're doing a little time traveling this Sunday, it's great to be together. So I want to tell you a little story that you'll be familiar with, even if you have forgotten it, maybe since high school. There were two great men in Western history who had a remarkable influence on the world we live in, especially white Western culture. And the first is Adam Smith, who was born in a small fishing village in Scotland in 1723 and spent a lot of time by himself as a kid. He was sick a lot, so he spent a lot of time reading. And when he grew up, he would go on to write a book that we know as The Wealth of Nations. And in The Wealth of Nations, he explored why some countries have a lot of wealth and other countries don't. And two of the major themes in that work are the inherent dominant self-interest alive inside each one of us, and that competition will naturally lead to the strong weeding out the weak, which leads to more productivity, wealth, expansion, power. Even if he didn't put it exactly in those words, that's one of the key takeaways. The other great man was Charles Darwin, a few decades later, after Adam Smith published Wealth of Nations, which was a bestseller, by the way, sold out in 6 months. Charles Darwin published his On the Origin of the Species. And that book, the full title is a little more cumbersome. It's On the Origin of the Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Now, Darwin, also a wonderful human being who contributed so much to our world. But this idea of natural selection, the adapting to one's environment by any means necessary, competing for resources to the death, that and Adam Smith's self-interest and competition are two of the most repeated and beloved and canonical stories that have ever been passed down. And they're not passed down as one of many stories that are true about humanity or the world we live in. They're passed down as the story that is true about us. And that has shaped a kind of monoculture of how we look at the world and ourselves. And this morning, we are going to go in search of seedlings of different ideas that challenge that and make our world and ourselves a little more complex. So in that spirit, let's sing together, rising in body or spirit. We're going to sing number 298, Wake Now My Senses, in the Gray Hymnal.
All right, I'd like to invite all the young ones and young at heart to join me in the front. Hello, Polly. Good morning. How are you this morning? Yeah, all good? That's great. All right, so I have a nice book here today called Seeds and Trees, because the grown-ups are going to be talking about trees and planting this morning, and we're going to be talking about trees and seeds and pollinators upstairs in RE this morning. Kind of the same. In the land of the king lived a special young prince who loved climbing trees and playing with friends. He lived in a castle overlooking the sea. He played in a field with his two kinds of trees. He only has two kinds of trees. That's okay. He carried a satchel slung low on his waist to contain all the seeds he might want to exchange. Each seed was a word that someone had spoken. Each seed was collected like a trinket or a token. It didn't quite matter where it had come from. A stranger, a friend, a whisper made up. He rose every morning to water the seeds from each of the words he had already received. When someone spoke kindly, not anything mean, they'd hand him a seed whose true essence was green. But sometimes the seeds would come bringing pain, seeds of dark color whose trees produced shame. Several dark seeds grew quickly, then withered. Others remained to grow slowly, unhindered. At the end of each day, he'd admire the seeds and go plant the new ones and play in his trees. The trunks and the branches of dark trees were laden with thistles and thorns, causing pain as he scaled them. Climbing these trunks and these branches was tricky. Each part of the tree that he grasped was quite prickly. Each time the prince climbed, he was bruised and was cut. Yet trees are for climbing, so through pain, he continued. But each time he climbed up his trees clothed in green, he felt safe and healed, as those trees weren't mean. His green trees were strong and they welcomed his touch. Their branches grew fruit he could eat or could trade. He could sit at the base or climb to the peak. He could rest in the branches or play hide and seek. As years passed, he noticed his green trees were weakening. The trunks at the base of the trees needed strengthening. Now the soil had hardened as life was escaping. Their canopies were covered. The dark trees had shaded them. He would plant his green seeds and dark seeds side by side. Then they'd war with each other and try to survive. His green trees were strongest with plenty of light, but his dark trees grew stronger in the darkness of night. They shared the same water and sunlight to grow, but the dark trees were hiding the fruit that would show. The green trees caused life, joy, and peace to grow near, but the dark seeds killed soil and grew trees clothed in fear. The field the prince planted had started to show many years of two kinds and the fruit that had grown. The fruit fell like seeds to the soil down below, filled with seeds to be gathered or given to sow. The young prince grew strong and became a young man. He continued to plant the seeds placed in his hand. He invited some friends to come play in his trees, but some liked to play in his trees of dark seeds. He had one special friend who always spoke true. Her words filled with grace, as good friends always do. She never spoke harshly and never told lies. She always spoke gently and with loving replies. She always gave green seeds and never took them back. She never ran out. She never had a lack. Her satchel was filled to the brim, overflowing with green seeds, no dark seeds, each one for sowing. She watched the prince till, plant, and water his grove. She watched and she waited until she asked to go. One day the prince said, "Hey, friend, come along." She agreed and then began singing a song. To the grove, we look down below at the roots in the soil and the trees that have grown. We will care for your green trees and even plant more seeds, but your dark trees will fall as this new life is sown. As he walked in his field with his friend by his side, the young prince took note as his trees came alive. Green trees swayed now to the sound of the tune, but the dark trees stood stiff, clenched their fists, and seemed rude. After long years of planting and watering seeds, they'd grown into mighty and powerful trees. The prince reminisced as he entered the grove. He thought back to each tree and the seed he had planted. He admired the beauty the green trees created, but noticed at the roots they were sadly ill-fated. His friend came prepared and brought tools along. The prince hadn't noticed, but his friend was quite strong. The tools that she carried were weathered and humble: a pickaxe, a saw, and an old rusty shovel. The friend asked the prince to please pick out a tree, one causing pain that he'd rather not see. The prince pointed up to one skinny dark mass. His friend said, "Watch this." Then she took out her axe. With one mighty swing, the tree fell to the ground. Then his friend dug her shovel deeply down. The root had to die and be plucked from the dirt. Then a green seed was planted and covered with earth. The prince then exclaimed, "Can you cut down more trees?" His friend said, "Oh yes, I have plenty of seeds." Many dark roots had tunneled so deep that it took them a while to dig underneath. Dark roots wrapped close round the green everywhere, so the friend showed the prince how to tend them with care. Her tools came in handy: the axe, saw, and shovel, and others the friend had brought here to the struggle. Then came the day when his forest was green. Not a dark tree was spotted, none that were mean. The friend then surprised the grown prince with some gifts, some tools for his new daily watering shifts. She instructed the prince not to plant any dark seeds, but to go to the cliff and cast them out to the sea. The prince held the green seeds, and those were all saved, but he tossed away the dark seed off the cliffs to the waves. Then he traveled to new fields abounding with trees, making sure that he packed his old satchel with seeds. To the grove, we will look down below at the roots in the soil and the trees that have grown. We will care for the green trees and even plant more seeds, but the dark trees will fall as this new life is sown. So he helped take away all the dark trees and only planted the green ones. What do you think about that? Do you think the world was probably a happier place now that it was full of, yeah, I think so too. Yeah? All right, we're gonna head upstairs so we can talk some more about trees and how we can spread kindness like seeds, just like the prince, all right? Let's go up.
today is "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House." Thank you. By Audre Lorde. David, could you play Eve's video?
Our reading this morning is from the great activist and writer Audre Lorde, and it's from her essay, "The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House." But she gave this as part of an address at a conference in 1979, a women's conference. And she was inviting her audience to try to think outside of the boxes we've been taught to live and think inside of. As she writes, advocating for the mere tolerance of differences is a total denial of the creative function of difference in our lives. Difference must not be merely tolerated, but seen as a means by which our creativity can spark. Only then does our interdependence, our connection with and need for people who are different than we are, become unthreatening. Only then do our differences become unthreatening. Only within that interdependency of different strengths, acknowledged and equal, can the power to seek new ways of being in the world generate. We have been taught either to ignore our differences or to view them as causes for separation and suspicion, rather than as forces for change.
Thank you. Today we take an offering of our gifts for the work of this congregation, both in our building and in the larger world. The monetary support of our members and friends, along with the generous gifts and time and talent, make the work of our congregation possible. I invite you to use the offering baskets here in the sanctuary, or if you're on Zoom, or if you prefer to donate via an app, you can access our Venmo from the website or scan the QR code in Drysdale Hall. You can also send a check to the church office, and so we take an offering of our gifts, generously offered and gratefully received. It is our tradition to share.
For generations, logging companies were one of the many industries that inherited and perpetuated the long-told story of self-interest and cutthroat competition that had been handed down to them. Logging companies were one of many industries that turned Adam Smith and Charles Darwin's telling of the world into standard business practices. After a logging company clears an expanse of trees, they want to get new trees planted as soon as possible to start the process again. And the better those trees grow, the more business and profit can grow. So wanting to stay on the cutting edge, so to speak, Logging companies for generations looked to the most up-to-date scientific information they could access about how to help their trees grow faster. The scientifically proven process they used for centuries was this. After they cut down a crop of trees for processing, they cleared away any stray saplings or other plants that had just sort of started growing willy-nilly. The idea was to leave the soil bare and open to new growth. Then they would plant one kind of tree on the bare soil, Douglas fir, for example, throughout the plot. And the idea was that this took away all competition for survival. Now the Douglas fir would not have to compete with the beech or aspen or cottonwood trees for sunlight and water. They could thrive unencumbered by rivals. This was the most up-to-date scientific approach available to these companies, because for a very long time, forest ecologists had inherited those same white Western stories and also understood trees to be solitary, self-interested life forms, outpositioning one another on the forest floor for the most advantageous spot, forcing the roots of other kinds of trees to seek elsewhere for water, hoarding their stores of carbon in case of future scarcity. And so it made sense, in order to dominate their own economic competition, logging companies created the ideal environment for one species of trees to let its own self-interest run wild, unchecked. But it was slow going. In spite of their efforts, if a disease or pest that was harmful to trees got into those unencumbered Douglas fir plots, it ran through like wildfire and killed every tree. After centuries of this, in the early 90s, a young woman named Suzanne Simard started her graduate studies in forestry in the Northwest United States. Through her research, she began to notice something strange. She noticed that trees in old-growth forests where the ecosystem had been undisturbed for generations and trees and plants of all kinds grew thick and tangled up with one another. These forests were remarkably resilient against disease and stress from extreme weather. Simard studied logging practices too, and she noticed that a larger number of the newly planted Douglas fir trees were likely to die from disease or stress from weather whenever their neighboring aspen, birch, and cottonwood trees were removed. They were more vulnerable, less resilient, when trees that were different from them were removed. And she couldn't understand why that would be. With what she knew of competition for resources and survival of the fittest, this didn't make sense. By keeping with their own kind, evenly spaced from one another, each of the logging company's Douglas fir trees had much more access to water and sunlight than the trees in the crowded, dense, old-growth forests. Simard suspected there was something she wasn't seeing. Her research took her underground. After nearly 30 years of research in temperate and coastal forests in North America, as well as in the Arctic, Simard pieced together her discoveries into a more complex understanding of the forest ecosystem. Underground, she found a network of tiny fuzzy threads. These fuzzy threads were mycorrhizal fungi. And these strands of fungi were wrapped around the roots of trees, connecting them to the roots of other trees. Out of sight, underground, the life of each tree was intricately interwoven with the lives of the trees around it. Douglas fir trees were not only connecting with other Douglas fir trees, they were linked to countless other species as well. And what Simard and her colleagues found was taking place within this web of connection was breathtaking. The trees were more than physically connected. They were sharing resources and information with one another. Older trees shared their water and nutrients with younger, less established trees. Healthy trees shared water and nutrients with trees that were sick or dying. When one tree began to develop a disease or a threatening insect infestation, the infected tree sent hormonal signals through the underground network to warn the others of the threat. And in turn, the trees who received the signal began building up their defenses to whatever specific threat they now knew was coming their way. And stunningly, when a tree died, it did not hoard its stores of carbon. Instead, Simard found at death, trees released the carbon they'd been storing back into the interconnected root system. Their final act passed on what sustenance they could to further the health and longevity of their neighbors. As Faris Jabour wrote for an article in the New York Times Magazine, Simard and her peers have demonstrated that an old-growth forest is neither an assemblage of stoic organisms tolerating one another, nor a merciless battle royale. It's a vast, ancient, intricate society. There is conflict in a forest, he writes, but there is also negotiation, reciprocity, and even selflessness. Decades after her discovery, Simard shared what it was like to slowly realize this intricate interconnectedness going on beneath her feet. She said, "I was taught that a tree is out to find its own way. She was taught that trees would do best when planted an orderly length away from one another, strictly in the company of trees exactly like them. She was taught that the way to help Douglas firs to thrive was to keep them safe from the threatening influence of other types of trees." Simard remembers how some of her more established colleagues mocked her when she first began her research. They found it foolish to waste time questioning certainties that had already been established, to look anywhere other than the white Western lens of self-interest through which they had all been taught to view and understand the natural world. Some complained that she was forcing her personal sentiments on the data, seeing what she wanted to see. Simard writes, "They told me, why don't you just study growth and yield? But," she says, "I was more interested in how these plants interacted." And she adds, "My colleagues thought it was all very girly." Self-interest is real. Competition is real. These forces are deeply embedded in our psyches and the society around us, but they are not the only forces at play. What if we could live as trees live? What if it were possible to see in some new way that we have not tried yet, to unearth some new discovery of what lies between us and connects us? What if it were possible, when the lighting was just right, to catch a glimpse of these living threads, the shared nerves that exist between us and the earth? Maybe as we go through the motions of our day, we're just too distracted, or we haven't learned yet to notice these unnamed threads running like a lifeline between our bodies, between our breath and the breath of trees, weaving us together into one shared life. It's lovely to think, if we could see it, feel our connectedness bone deep, it's lovely to think how we might live. Blessed be. Amen. I invite you to be with me now in a time of meditation and prayer. If you are comfortable closing your eyes, becoming more aware of your feet on the floor, the weight of your body in your chair. And if you can, as you take a few deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth, just find your pulse, maybe at your neck, maybe at your wrist. And as you deepen your breath, just feel that rhythm, that heartbeat that accompanies your breath in and out, connecting you with all living things. In through your nose, out through your mouth. And just give thanks for a moment for that rhythm, its simplicity and resilience. And then you can keep your fingers on your pulse if you like, or maybe return your hands to your lap if that's more comfortable. And I offer you these words by Mary Oliver. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locusts, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches, and they call again. It's simple, they say, and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. Amen. Our closing hymn is number 1068 in the teal hymnal, Rising Green.
That's all that was written down. Well, as our service draws to a close, we extinguish the chalice saying these words. We extinguish this flame So we have a benediction by Reverend Stevens and then a postlude, and I did not pick this postlude, even though the last time it was played in fall of 2015, I did choose it.
Also, we need to wave goodbye.
So give me credit again.
So
yeah.
first we all need to wave goodbye. Then we'll have the benediction. All right, there we go.
In the week ahead that we have been given, may we never hurry through the world, but recognize our kindred everywhere we look, bowing often.